absolutism, the characteristics are the same,
the lack of any appeal,
but that's not
the worship of him by his slaves.
Except that that's not at all what any tradition envisions, and even if it did envision it, as you and I think would both agree, the envisioning of traditions of what a God could be are very limited and partial. And so if you want to make it, yes, that it's North Korea forever, then I would say you're belittling the notion of what it means to have a God. You're belittling the notion of what it means to have eternity in, if not bliss, at least reasonable happiness. And it's true that you lose everything in this world, but also it's not at all the case, and you know that it's not the case, that the notion of the afterlife invariably leads to neglect of what is important in this world. Sometimes, in fact, it does the exact opposite. You can take large swaths of belief. You mentioned Marx. Communism, for example, which repudiated the idea of the afterlife and therefore thought you have to create utopia here, and it led it to horrendous misdeeds throughout the 20th century. So the belief in the afterlife can be totalitarian and terrible, but so can the idea that there's nothing after this world and therefore you have to perfect human beings here. It can work both ways.
I wanted to ask you, Christopher, do you really believe that dead is dead? You don't believe in any kind of consciousness going after death? You believe dead is dead?
Okay. The survival of consciousness independent of the brain, which Sam knows more about than I, and we're getting better acquainted with, is quite different from the religious belief in a mandated path by which you can follow or not follow, leading to reward and punishment. Completely different. It's different in the same way as, say, spiritualism was, which wasn't really a religion, but was a very strong, fraudulent movement that not coincidentally flourished after the First World War in the hope of putting people in touch with dead relatives and so forth. Not one single interesting thing ever got said from the other side. Fascinating, you know. Burblings from the beyond, but millions of people pitifully paid attention to it. I guess my answer has to depend on David's point about stuff. We actually know a great deal more than we ever did, than any of our predecessors did, about what stuff we're made of. We know that our DNA gives us enormous amounts in common with other animals, huge amounts. We know that stars had to die. Larry Krauss makes this point very well in his lectures on physics. Stars had to die. One every second blew up, and is still blowing up since the Big Bang. We're made, if you want to call it pretty, from stardust or nuclear waste, depending on your on your analysis. But there's absolutely no reason to think that those molecules would be worth reassembling. That they will rejoin, as do the animals. And as have done the species we didn't know about till recently, the other human tribes, the Cro-Magnons, the Neanderthals, the ones that aren't even mentioned in any holy book. They only died out about 20,000 years ago. Who has heaven and hell for them? It's as likely for us as it is, I think, for any other dog, whale, or bacteria. Well, and no more than that.
Sam, what does it mean when you write that you think that consciousness may indeed survive?
Well, there are many odd ways in which consciousness could survive, and you can make a philosophically respectable argument that consciousness could survive the death of the brain. It's by no means the majority opinion in neuroscience or philosophy that it would. For instance, there's a philosopher at Oxford, Nick Bostrom. This is one of the weirder arguments, but still more plausible than the arguments you get from religion. Nick, there's actually very little you have to assume to make this seem somewhat robust. The argument is called the simulation argument, and he argues that we are all very likely not living in a real universe, but living in a simulated universe. And we are being simulated on the hard drives of computers of the future. Now he gets there with a few simple steps. You simply have to acknowledge that consciousness is at bottom the result of information processing at the level of the brain, and there's nothing magical about brains. It could be information processing in a computer of the future. Most scientists think that's true. They don't think there's anything magical about the wet stuff in our heads. And that consciousness is at some point going to be instantiated in computers. Then you simply have to grant that humans of the future will run simulations of the past in the way that we run simulations, Sims games, and then there's just one short move that simulated universes, almost by definition, will outnumber real universes, and therefore we are a lot more likely to be among the simulated ancestors than the real ancestors. Now, again, this everyone acknowledges it seems a little crazy, but the assumptions that you have to take on board are not so weak. And I would add to this the somewhat disconcerting idea that if in fact we are running as a simulation on a computer of the future, this computer could have been built by Mormons or Scientologists who would want to simulate the truth of their religion. And therefore, all religions could be true in this simulated universe, and we could expect to see Jesus coming back on clouds of glory and moving to Missouri as the Mormons expect. So now all of that sounds completely crazy, but it is not as crazy as the version of the afterlife that is really on offer traditionally, which has been actually neatly sidestepped here because it entails the resurrection of the dead. Most people think that the afterlife religion is offering, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, has something to do with the soul floating off the brain into a tunnel of light and into paradise. But that's actually not the canonical afterlife. The canonical afterlife is God has to do the humble work of reassembling us. And I don't want to take more than my allotted time here, but I think we should talk about just how implausible that vision is, because that actually is the vision of Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
I just want to make one quick addendum. There's also, who I thought you were going to talk about, is Galen Strawson. I mean, another Oxford philosopher who says that consciousness is actually so impossible philosophically to figure out that it must be that it exists even in inanimate matter, even though it doesn't seem that way. So I don't think that it's... But let's leave aside how difficult consciousness is to figure out without some sort of either strange hypothesis or spirit. Yes, it's true that much of Judaism talks about resurrection, much of it talks about afterlife, but there are there's a plurality of voices. And I mean, the Talmud says, for example, you assume that the sages are in paradise, but it is not so. In fact, paradise is in the sages. That's not the sort of voice that generally you hear when the literalist view of an afterlife is attacked. And for more on that, I turn to my colleague, Rabbi Brad Artson.
I would actually love for us all to go out to coffee and leave them aside so that we could say things like, wow, that's really interesting, I haven't thought about that. And what do you do with this? Rather than the scoring of points. And so there's a lot of cleverness and there are a lot of quips. But at the end of it, what it sounds like we're saying is that religion is a monolith, and the worst of religion is compared to the best of science, which is fluid and evolving. And I'm halfway there with you. I think one of the greatnesses of science is its capacity to be self-reflective and its capacity to change convictions. But the wreckage of scientific error is fairly impressive, and the diversity of religious thought is also, I think, undergirded, unfortunately, I think in part because we all had bad religious education as kids and we're still in recovery. So...
But Bradley, I want to accept your challenge, but what do you, I mean, is Maimonides the worst of religion? Maimonides came right out and said you have to believe in the resurrection as a literal
Yes, and
truth.
Maimonides also said that what I've written in my book is disguised so that people will, if they need literalism, latch onto it and miss what I'm trying to say. And he also said that we call the world to come because we don't experience it during this lifetime, but eternity exists at the present. And if you attain a right consciousness, you can be in eternity now. So the challenge is, we all come to it with our own different concrete needs, but religion is, I think, far more nuanced. And I guess the plea I would like to offer to you, because the parts of your books, both of you gentlemen, that I agreed with was everything you trashed religion for, it deserves to be trashed for. I have an autistic son, and if I believed in that bully in the sky, I would have to tell Dr. Wexler that I was leaving my employment. But I don't, and I don't think that my tradition or the Buddhist tradition or the richness of Hindu tradition understood in a nuanced and ethical way is any more problematic than science's capacity to learn from its mistakes and to move on. And the way the Bible is used in my community with my students is, I would hold up as ethical as anywhere else, and a part of that is the recognition that although we do not know, we hold to hopes that orient us and allow us to value each other as of abiding significance.
Which can be done by anyone who repudiates the supernatural. Look, I don't mind attacking religion at its best if you'd rather I do that. I mean, behind the idea of judgment, remember, which is part of the deal of the afterlife and the reward of heaven or hell, is some rough concept of justice, that there's an equalization of the odds against which we struggled when we were alive, that the tears are dried, and that the wrongdoing is punished. Very, very old wellspring of human aspiration. Why do the wicked prosper? I would really like to know. And why, as Hamlet says, so much contumely is heaped on the patient and the meek. Now, the reason why Sam's Oxonian friend disturbs us when he elaborates his theory is we don't like to think that we're just digitized by someone else's brain, that we're rats in some maze, someone else's maze. Nor, though, rather interestingly, do we like to think that everything that happens to us is random. We repudiate both ideas. They're both equally distressing. But the reason why I started with my totalitarian point is this. Take the case that I still can't get out of my mind. You remember reading about it, the woman in Austria who was kept in a cellar by her father for 30 years and raped every day and bore him children who he raped also. Picture how she must have prayed, how she must have wearied heaven with her prayers, and how accidental was her release that we even know about. You're told those tears will be dry, that'll be compensated. In other words, that has to mean her suffering was part of the plan. We let that happen. Yes, we did know. We do take responsibility. That was part of the design, but it'll be better later. I think that makes her suffering meaningless, and in fact rather obscene. We'll do that to her, but we'll make it up later on. Take another great Austrian, now deceased, born in Braunau on the Inn, and dead in May, I think, 1945. Yes, that was all part of the plan too, but believe me, we'll see to it that he's punished for it. Now, if you don't mind my saying so, Rabbi, that kind of thinking seems to me to materialize both the worst in the concept, the horrible idea of the human being as an experimental object in a design that's opaque to us, where we're played with, and to maximize the horror of randomness. To pick one Austrian, make him very nearly the ruler of the whole of Europe, another Austrian, and keep her as a prisoner of her rapist father for 3 decades. And that's all part of the plan too. So it's maximizing chaos, and it's maximizing tyranny and deliberate cruelty. And that's why I think reason has to repudiate this whole means of thinking. Reason and justice too, I should have added.
As I'm sure it would if religion thought that way, but it doesn't. In fact.
Wait a minute.
No, wait.
Dave, I'll give you your time here, please.
Okay.
That's the move that's really not open to you. If you want to change the subject to a truly purified wisdom tradition that is non-dogmatic, that's just open to mystery, you have to...
No, I'm not going to do that.
Okay, but if you want to follow the path...
You have to hear the move before you repudiate.
No, but I think you're taking the move that Bradley...
You think so, but I might not be.
Well, let me just tell you what I heard you do.
Okay, go ahead.
You just said religion is not the way Christopher suggested it was, and in the vast majority of cases, it is. And so you have to at least admit that we are not caricaturing religion. 50% of Americans think they're going to see their pets in heaven. I mean, we're dealing.
What happen if you don't?
Right. We're having this conversation in the context of how religion is practiced.
Soon?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.